All right, no worries. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon to different folks in different parts of the world. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to Access Agile Festival's presentation today on Scrumban. We'll go ahead and get started now. So Minaxi and I have put together this presentation and we are very excited to share with you what we've put together. I think our thought process was a lot is known about Scrum, a lot is known about Kanban, and a lot of teams want to explore and learn more about what Scrumban is. So it's some sort of a mystery with this word, and we wanted to demystify it. With that, let's go ahead and get started. Minaxi, you want to go ahead and we can introduce ourselves? You're on mute, Minaxi.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. And I'd like to first of all start with a big thank you to Access Agile and all of you for being here, and to Toby, because he was my cheerleader and he said, Minaxi, what are you doing? Go ahead and apply. And I rushed and the proposal got accepted. So thank you all for that. Well, to say from this experience of mine, you can probably gather what a generous human being Toby is. And in his professional life, he has over 15 years of experience in a variety of agile transformations, which is a lot he's seen everything there is out there to see. He's co-founded meetups. He has chaired last year's Agile 20 Reflect Festival's DMV sister conference here. And he speaks multiple languages fluently. He's a tinkerer. Anytime I ever kind of talk to him, he's tinkering with some electronics and old antique kind of speakers. He has real vacuum transistors at home. I can vouch for that. So you can see the depth that he has beyond his professional life. And without further ado, I will move on in this
Thank you,
slideshow. Yeah, thank you.
All right, so it's my pleasure to introduce Minaxi. Minaxi and I have worked together on a lot of meetups and conferences. Minaxi is a smart, savvy, pragmatic agilist, really brings a lot of common sense into things that often we forget to think about. So it brings a lot of common sense into everything that we do. And she has a very grounding effect. You speak to her and you get grounded. Tons of federal government experience. And I think what strikes me most about her is always willing to help, always willing to go beyond the basics to help people. She volunteers extensively. She's part of 2 or 3 meetups that she spends a lot of time. And less known fact about her is that she has lived in 7 different countries. So a lot of travel growing up, and she's learned so much from all of these cultures. Every now and then, suddenly she'll come up with a Japanese quote or a Portuguese quote. So it's very interesting to work with Minaxi. So my pleasure to introduce her, and together we are here today to talk to you about Scrumban. So let's go ahead and get started. Minaxi, you want to hit this one?
Sure. So if everyone is familiar with this screen, basically you go to menti.com and you can do it using your mobile devices and put this code in. When you put this code in, you will see a screen, and I can do my screen share. So you can see what's going on here.
There you go.
Yep. Let it just refresh, because it was there and now it's refreshing. So basically, if you go and use this code 34580913, and I can also share the link in the chat, bear with me. But essentially, go ahead and yes, we already have someone putting their what they do in their role.
And this will help us to kind of customize our presentation today and understand where the majority of the people are and also understand outliers so that we can shape our conversations today.
And people who are using Menti for the first time, just for your information, the larger the font, it basically puts in perspective that that is the majority of the roles that we have in our audience today. Agile coaches, DevOps leaders.
Yeah, very interesting.
Wonderful. Love it. Out of the box thinker.
I like that. I love that.
Scrum Lord. Okay.
Funny, funny. All right, that's awesome. I mean, actually, I think we have quite a good mix here, but looks like Scrum Masters, a ton of Scrum Masters, and then a good combination of DevOps, coaching, career coach. Coaching seems to be the second largest in the population here. That's awesome. All right, so let's move forward. I think, do I have to share the screen again, Minaxi?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. All right. All right. So why are we here today? So we wanted to understand, what you do. Obviously, we are here to learn about Scrumban. So here's how we plan to do it. We'll do a quick introduction so everybody gets a level set on what Scrumban is and get to understand it. We'll talk about, what is the context? Why do we need Scrumban? What problems does it solve? And then talk about the business case, right? Just trying something fancy or going after the shining toy is probably not a sustainable way to do it. We do make changes so that we can get value. So let's understand, what is the business case for it, and then how do you integrate different best practices or practices to make it Scrumban? So what are the components? How do we integrate them? And not just starting it, but how do you make it sustainable? How do you make it work in your organization? What are some of the things that you need to think about when you're implementing it? What are the typical challenges that you might face? So we're going to talk about that. And then we'll talk a little bit about measuring progress. So that's what we have planned for you today. We have another very quick Menti Meter exercise. If you could please go to menti.com again and hit the code 57941489, and Minaxi is going to put it in the chat as well. What we are interested to know is, what process or method are you using currently? That will give us a good understanding of the folks who are on.
Here, I will share the link. So if people prefer a link and if they prefer the code, here is the code.
Okay, so we kind of put like 2 minutes for this. So if you could quickly select it. Forward after that.
Okay. I'm not agile. That's very common. The second one here is very common.
Yeah.
We are a mature team. Congratulations, you've done it.
As long as nobody says, what is Agile, I'm okay.
Awesome, that's great. So a lot of people are willing to experiment. That's awesome up here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'll stop my screen share. Toby, you can take it from here.
Okay, this is good. We have 11 people who participated. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so.
Thank you.
I am sharing my screen. Are you able to see it?
Yes.
Okay, so let's move forward. So the question to ask is, whatever framework you're using today, right? Whether it is Scrum framework or method, whether it is Scrum, whether it's XP, whether it's Kanban, Crystal, even some of the scaling frameworks out there. The question to ask ourselves is your framework working for you? And if it is not working for you, what are you doing about it? So one thing that that we've learned from the manifesto is that it's more important, or it's important to give more value to responding to change over just following a plan, right? So I think the same applies here as well. If there is a out of the box Scrum, out of the box Kanban, out of the box Safe, if that doesn't work in your organization, maybe because of culture, maybe because of resistance to change, maybe because of the specialized work that you do, what do you do at that point? And what we want to help share, and hopefully something that you learn from today, is that it's okay to take best practices from different frameworks, different methods, different approaches, and kind of remix them, right? You know how DJs remix? They take an old song, a new tune, mix it together to make a new one that really works. Why can't we do that? Out of box thinking, right? This is where the growth mindset versus a fixed mindset comes into play. Just taking the best elements from a couple and experimenting with it, see how it works. The parts that don't work, you learn quickly from it, you fail fast, make changes, try again, till you get to that perfect recipe that works for you, right? So Scrumban is one such customized approach where you can take 2 or 3 different existing approaches or frameworks and kind of like applying the Cupid principle, right? Getting them to get date and then adjust and then marry. And that's why we chose the topic for today, which is Scrumban, the marriage that works. But then you have to adjust, and then you will start seeing the result. So Scrumban is one such approach. Now the question arises, okay, Toby, that's great, but what is Scrumban? So just real quick, we're going to do a low tech this time. We want to understand what you think the word Scrumban means. If you can quickly put it in chat, just one short sentence, and we'll take a couple that we're going to share, but we want to hear from you what your current understanding of what Scrumban is. Okay, so what I'm seeing, Scrum plus Kanban, Scrum mixed with Kanban, bringing elements of Scrum with Kanban to make it work. Of course, Isabella, I was expecting that from you.
Why? we make it work. We make it work.
We talked about it last week. Yeah. All right, so we have blend of Scrum and Kanban. Okay, yeah, I think everybody is on the right track with that. It's definitely Scrum plus Kanban. So let's reveal what we have here to share with you. And here we go. So what is Scrumban? So Minaxi and I looked around to see if there was a perfect definition of Scrumban. If you could please mute yourself if you're not speaking, that would be great. Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead. You had a question? Okay. So Minaxi and I looked around to see if we could find a perfect definition of Scrumban. We couldn't really find a perfect one. So we took elements from different things that we saw and kind of put one together.
I lost your voice. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Hello?
I can hear both of you.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So we came up with a very simplistic kind of way of understanding what it is. And I know a lot of Agile purists hate the word hybrid, but I think in this case it works. So what we think it is it's a hybrid Agile approach which combines both Scrum and Kanban, and it integrates the design of Scrum with the lean and pull workflow from the visualization of Kanban. So it takes the good parts of both Scrum and Kanban and leaves out some of the stuff that we could probably, that things that don't give a whole lot of value or areas that are problematic. You could leave those out and take what works best for you. And it's interesting to know that the word Scrumban was coined by Corey Laddus, and we both looked in the dictionary if the word Scrumban exists, and it doesn't. There is a little something on Wikipedia, but it's not really there as a word. But yeah, so it comes from the book, which is Essays on Kanban Systems on Lean Software Development. So since Scrumban is made up of Scrum and Kanban, and for the folks who are with us today, you may be using one versus the other. So we'll do a quick refresher on, what is Scrum, what is Kanban, and then we can take it forward to show you how we can take the best elements from both and kind of make that remix. So first, Scrum. I mean, this is a huge topic and probably hours of presentation and discussion by itself. But that's not the purpose here. I just want to refresh a few things so that we know when we go talk about both together, it's fresh in your mind. So Scrum was developed as a framework for engineering in the software industry, right? This was made for the software industry. And according to this annual survey, which happens every year in summer, they find that this year's report says that more than 60% of Agile teams worldwide, the most common method, framework, approach, whatever you want to call it, is Scrum. So more than 60% of people worldwide today use Scrum. So what is it? So basically, it's a fixed cadence. Whether, again, it depends on whether you're doing 1 week. I've known teams that have done 4 weeks. The most prevalent and common is around 2 weeks. So it's a fixed cadence of 1 to 4 weeks. And then there are set ceremonies, there are set roles. So basically the ceremonies are your sprint planning, your daily scrum, your review, your retrospective. And although not a ceremony, refinement is a very, very important, and most organizations who are doing mature level Scrum, they actually think of refinement also as a ceremony, but it's not a ceremony per se. So that's the highlight as far as Scrum is concerned, and it's based on these principles of commitment, respect, openness, courage, and focus. So that a very quick refresher on Scrum. Let's quickly explore what Kanban is. So Kanban, as you know, has its roots in manufacturing. Scrum was done mainly for software versus Kanban came from the automobile industry. And one of the key features that they focus on is, managing work in progress. So the whole idea behind Kanban is visualization of the work that you're doing, reducing or managing or maintaining your work in progress or WIP, and then viewing the flow of work and measuring, how long does it take from the time a card or a story or a work item comes into your board and makes it to the end. So the whole journey from left to right, how long does it take? Is it efficient? Where is it that you have bottlenecks, and how do we solve those bottlenecks so that the flow is continuous? And a couple of highlights to think about is that just in Kanban, you just do as much planning as needed. There are not so many ceremonies. There are not so many events that need to take place. It's very lean. You're reducing waste. You are basically moving forward as efficiently as possible. And the team has the ability to adjust and pivot and be nimble and make changes as possible, because the goal for the whole team is to help to move the cards that they're working on from left to right. And one other thing important to think about is that Kanban is based on a pull system versus a push, which basically means that once, for example, the developer is done with what he or she is working on, they mark it, and the person who's going to work on it next, who's going to be testing it, is going to pull. So that's a highlight again for Kanban. It's simple principles. Just start with what you have. You don't have to, do like a big bang and make a huge process. Start with what you have, adjust, inspect, and adapt, and move forward. And then there's a lot of importance that is given to respect respecting the roles, respecting the current process, and making all the process very, very clear and explicit, so everybody understand what the roles are, who's doing what, and what rules to be followed throughout the entire journey. So I talked about visualizing the workflow, I talked about WIP, managing the work continuously, and then there's continuous inspect and adapt, right? I know a lot of Kanban teams do a retrospective every X amount of days or weeks, but then the idea here is to continuously evolve. With that, let's now think and talk about what is common between Scrum and Kanban, and how do we make this work? Minaxi, you're on mute.
Yeah, that's what I was peeking the other side to get open that. So, just like every good marriage, one person's weakness is the other person's strength. And so while we may find Scrum inadequate or Kanban inadequate, we can take the best of both and make it a whole. And that's what today's whole idea and conversation is about. So thank you, Toby, for going so in such a structured manner with what was Scrum and what was Kanban. So just from my own personal experience, what I can tell you for sure is some of the complaints I heard from my Scrum teams: too many meetings. We do not want to do backlog refinement every 2 weeks. Sometimes the backlog refinement date was there, but the PO didn't have, enough stories ready to do the refinement. Not their fault. We are agile. The customer just changed the requirements. Mm-hmm. So considering some of these constraints of real life, we decided in our particular projects, okay, what shall we do? Can we find this happy middle ground where we are still staying true to the spirit of Agile, to the principle, but not necessarily being so rigid about our framework and how we understand it? So we said, okay, what is kind of our roadblock? That defined cadence, that no matter how late the stories came and we didn't get a time to refine it, sprint date start, sprint date after 2 weeks stop. So that was one of our, pet peeves or complaints. The good thing was we had artifacts. We had a backlog. We had team agreements. We had some of these things which would give us transparency and reliability in, how we were going to execute those processes. Okay, so if this is a good thing, let's keep it. Retrospectives. My team, I know a lot of teams, do not appreciate retrospectives, but we usually have a blast at our retrospectives. So we definitely wanted to keep that, and we were truly learning from that. And then there was this whole idea that even at the end of the sprint, let's say a developer finished a story and had the capacity of taking like a 1 or a 2 points, by the sprint commitment and velocity and all that other metrics baggage that leadership sometimes wants, we could not take another story because we were afraid, like, oh, what if it rolls over? So given all of those things, we said, okay, let's look at Kanban, where you can plan as you go. You do not have to have defined refinements so many days in your sprint. You have this visual board of transparency. Kanban has something called Kaizen, which is like retrospectives. It's ongoing, it's flexible, doesn't have to be at the end of the demo and sprint. And how do you limit work? Because we know work is like infinite, right? If we give no limits, either in the weeks of our cadence, or what do we do? So that's where Kanban comes in. It says wherever, so let's say we have 4 developers on the team, but only 1 tester. Guess where all the stories are going to pile up? At the testing level. So the slowest point of this flow is where we kind of put our WIP. So if we know that our tester can only take max 3 stories in one flow, then we will say the WIP should be no more than, once the 3 stories are in the queue, that's it, that's our WIP. So this is kind of how my story of how we went and adopted Scrum and Kanban. And then when Toby and I were researching and sharing our notes, it seemed like, yeah, this is what the real use cases are like. So that was, a great experiment that was successful. So why did we end up using Scrumban? Just to kind of capture all the things we discussed so far. We were able to detect our bottlenecks, like I gave you the example between my testers and the developers. Then, so basically we were able to say work in progress, right? So like if 20 more stories were coming into the backlog or were being pushed and pressure was being pushed, because of Scrumban, it was right there saying, no more, this is our WIP limit. We cannot take it. You all decide amongst yourself how you want to do this, but we have that established now. On-demand planning, so people are not like saying, okay, we have to do our backlog refinement because the Scrum framework says so. We do not have enough stories in our backlog, so let's go talk to our POs, do some more refinement and add to our backlog. Another important aspect was release on demand. So previously, whereas we could only wait till the demo was done and then deploy it, now we have a flow. It's continuous. So the moment something gets developed, tested, reviewed, integrated, boom, it can go into the CI/CD pipeline and get released. We have some DevOps folks here. If they want to put any other thoughts about that in the chat, please. We are always learning from each other. So I would love to learn from you. So feel free to, add any more concepts. And then there is swarming. What happens because we have T-shaped people on our team? So people who can test and develop and do analysis on user stories, they can all swarm and say, okay, this is right now where the bottleneck is, like some bugs came in from production. So we will not pull more work till we solve this. So there's a lot of collaboration, a lot of joint ownership, all the principles that Agile wants us to take into consideration. Going to implementing Scrumban, I will pass the baton on to Toby again.
Sure. So thank you, Minaxi. I think you brought a lot of personal stories about how challenges you had and how you collaborated with your team and came up with an approach that works for your team. And that's the beauty of Scrumban. It's not a tool, it's not a methodology, it's not a framework. It's an approach. It's a tool that you have in your toolbox to use, where it gives you that creativity to use what you want, take the best of multiple approaches and make your own that is going to work for you. And through Kaizen, which is continuous improvement, you can improve on it. You start with what you have and you improve on it. So why use Scrumban? So here are 9 different factors that we thought that, based on our experience implementing and leading Scrumban teams, these are the 9 that we talked about. And I think Minaxi hit quite a few of those. So I'm not going to go line by line or box by box in this case. But let's talk about 2, right? One, let's talk about based on a pull system. Traditional Scrum is where you make the commitment in the beginning of the sprint and you make a hard commitment to that. Doesn't mean you cannot make changes based on any dynamics or things that come up urgent from a business perspective or any production issues and stuff like that. You do make some adjustment, but in general, you make a commitment at the beginning of the sprint and you stick to it for the rest of it. And it's based on kind of a push system, wherein the people who are working on one particular part of the story, once they finish, then it goes to the next. And within each sprint, you're doing analysis, you're doing development, you're doing testing, you're doing your documentation, you're doing the acceptance and the handoffs, whatever minimal handoffs that needs to be done. All that is done kind of like in a push way. Whereas in Kanban, it uses a pull system. So what does that mean? So once once the story is taken in or the work item is taken in, the team members work on it and make sure that meets its definition of ready, and it's in a good enough position for the team to take it on. And then the person who's going to be developing the code is going to pull it from the previous column, works on it. Once that work is done, they mark it that it's ready. And the people who are going to work in the next stream of work, which typically is testing, they're going to pull it. So they are going to finish what they're working on first, and then they're going to pull it. So it's a pull system and not a push system. We've talked about release on demand already. Now let's talk about joint ownership. So another thing to think about is, as opposed to a singular product owner, what makes Scrumban different and very effective is that you have close proximity to the stakeholders. You have close proximity to the people for who you are developing the software, and you are getting feedback in a more rapid, faster way. You're not waiting for the demo at the end of the sprint to get that feedback. There is joint ownership of it. The other way to look at joint ownership is that, as Minaxi mentioned, we have cross-functional team. So it's not like, okay, this is a developer story and I'm a tester, I'm X, I'm Y. No. So everybody jointly owns the work item, and they take pride in moving the work item or the card from left to right. I remember I was working for a Veterans Affairs project, a US government Veterans Affairs project, and we were using Scrumban. And in the big hall where all of us were seated, there was a big gong. So whenever a story was completed by our team, they'll go and hit the gong, and everybody in the hall would actually hear that and say, okay, that team finished the story. So there was a lot of pride in doing that. So whenever somebody was stuck, people would swarm to help them because there was joint ownership and pride in moving the stories forward. So it's very exciting when the whole team is passionate about that. Just think about that. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into all of these 9. We talked about quite a few of them, but let's talk about some of the challenges that, yes.
I see a different slide, so maybe just move down to the next slide, please.
You are seeing a different slide, okay?
Yeah, okay, perfect, thank you. Now I see the right slide.
Really? Okay. Okay, so what slide are you seeing right now?
I'm seeing the one that says people involved.
Yeah, so that is the wrong. So
now I see
implementing Scrumban. Yeah, so
yes.
I was talking about the earlier slide, which is the benefits or why you should use Scrumban. Okay. So let's talk about implementing. Right, we've understood what Scrum is, what Kanban is, combined together what benefits comes out of it. So if you had to think about implementing Scrumban in your organization, how would you go about doing that? And I'm just going to say this, it's no different than introducing any new method, any new approach, any new framework that you're introducing to your team or to your organization, and really focus on 3 aspects, right? The people, process, and technology, and definitely pay a lot of attention to the people side of it as well. So what does that mean? So 1, make sure that you understand what skill level or agile maturity level your team is. Make sure that the goal is clearly understood from the leadership. Clearly understand what problems you're trying to solve by mixing together 2 different frameworks or 2 different approaches, so that your eye is on the 8 ball, which is to solve that problem. You're not making this process change for heroism or just for the sake of trying out a new tool. It's more to solve a problem. So understanding the problem domain first is extremely important. And then the simple steps, like anytime you launch any new team, any new project, is make sure you have the right team members with the right skill sets. And especially being cross-functional is very important. You don't want people in your Scrumban team who say, I'm a developer and all I do is develop. We want people who say, hey, I'm a developer, but I can also test. I can also write testing scripts. I can also write documentation. I will help with the demos. You want people with that attitude and with a cross-functional skill set. So if you're moving from Scrum to Kanban, you probably already have a backlog. So ensure that you have a healthy prioritized backlog to start with. It just makes the rollout or the implementation easier. And then establish your WIP from the beginning. A lot of times Scrum teams are not used to the concept of WIP or work in progress. When you're implementing Scrumban, it's a good idea to do that from the very beginning. Now, exit and entry criteria, you might be thinking, what is that? So in simple words, think of the traditional, from the Scrum world, your definition of ready and the definition of done. Think of that and now translate that into making it a little more simple for Scrumban, so that when any story is going from one column to the other. So for example, if you have a simple Kanban board of to do, doing, done, what does it take when a card has to move from to do to doing? You know, what is the criteria that it needs to be met? And just like in Kanban, in Scrumban, you want to make all these policies very explicit so that everybody understands what does it need to meet before it can move from one column to the other. So make that very, very clear. And then before you start a project or any kind of transformation, any kind of change that you're doing, agree on some metrics. I've seen and worked with so many teams that, you know, they've been following a particular process for 5-6 months, and then they think of metrics. It's better to think of what you want to measure, why you want to measure, what is the benefit that you're going to get from any of those metrics that the team wants to be involved in, and set it up in the beginning so that you can see the progress from the baseline, from when you started to as the journey progresses, right? And you can think of 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is, then you come back and look at it, say, okay, when we started, here's where we were, here's how we are today, and what adjustments do we need to make so that we continue to derive the value and the benefits that we had aimed for. We are continuing to solve those problems. And then schedule your daily events and start. Don't wait for it to be perfect. Start with what you have. If you have this basic setup, I guarantee you that you have enough to get started, and then slowly over time, iteratively make changes, small changes that is going to help you. With that, I'm going to request Minaxi to come back and take the next slide on.
Yep, just unmute myself. So just the roles don't need to change, as in the people part of what stayed in Scrum can very much stay the same. If you have product owners, you can still have product owners. If you have Scrum masters, flow masters, delivery managers, that part doesn't have to change. It's just, again, the change in mindset and the amount of more flexibility and discipline. How do you balance that? I love what Cohen mentioned here, right? If we start off with Kanban, there will be utter chaos because we've not learned about agile delivery. We've not learned about shifting left in our testing. We've not learned about continuous integration and tech debt. So from that perspective, start with Scrum. The people can have the same roles, but it's just a more agile, more improved mindset, and we can move into the Scrumban mode. Thank you. Now, what are the challenges that we experienced during our journey of Scrumban? Some people are nervous, and rightly so, right? Again, in life, I feel resistance has a bad connotation, but it's kind of like salt. It is necessary. One, it helps us challenge our own mindset. People like me who are very optimistic about everything, resistance gives me a reality check. Like, okay, how can I and what can I do to go deeper into my research to say, hey, don't worry, we've got your back. I've kind of considered this part of the failure. So that is challenging, but it's not unsurmountable because, like I said, you can go back, bring those discussions to the table and say, what is it that makes us feel afraid of this change? Fixed mindset versus growth mindset. Again, the fixed mindset is more risk averse. Again, not a good thing or a bad thing, right? And then we have the growth mindset people who are like, yeah, let's do this, let's change this, like, let's take this risk. So again, two different sides coming together, just like Scrum and Kanban is always a good thing, but it can get challenging depending on how strong and how loud and how much seniority the fixed mindset has. It can definitely be a challenge sometimes. The teams are willing to take the risk, but leadership is not, or vice versa. So again, it just depends, who's loudest, and in terms of hierarchy, sometimes it can matter a lot. Taking a big bang approach. This usually I've experienced when the leadership wants to go Scrumban, and the leadership says, you know what, tomorrow, next week, we are going to bring consultants and everybody's going to go value stream. No more projects, no more products. Anything that we kind of try and bite across all teams, across all situations, is definitely something that I would say, please be wary of it. Start small, improve, learn, and adapt, and then spread the joy, spread your inspiration, but definitely start small. That is something in my personal experience, I have not seen it work the other way around. Like I mentioned, balance for the earlier points, the start small is pretty much what I've seen work. I've seen a lot of transformations. Too much focus on tools. I've heard people say, oh, our company needs to spend on Jira. If you don't spend on Jira, we are not agile. Sticky notes, whiteboard, Sharpies, notepads, tape, anything, because it's about people and how we want to work, right? Like, for example, the conference we are doing here, and Cohen, you can chime in, right? And Toby, you can chime in after co-chairing so many conferences and being an ambassador and everything, right? What do we have? It's a free conference. We have no money to pay for expensive tools, right? Free Zoom accounts, free Teams, free WhatsApp, and we are able to do it. So don't put focus so much on tools that we forget, the people part of it and how brilliantly we can work together if we put our minds to it.
Yep.
Inadequate agile skills. Yes, this can definitely be a challenge because it's like a toddler who's just learning to walk. We're asking them to do gymnastics, right? We definitely want to set that expectation and provide people with the training, coaching, use cases. Again, start small and develop those skills if there aren't any. So please be mindful. This is all about people. We can't just take something from a book and implement it. Team dynamics and politics. Part of that is resistance. Part of it is fixed mindset and hierarchy and people, being insecure, and rightly so. We've seen, companies transform and not care about the people that they might have to let go. At the same time, we have seen the reverse. We have seen companies who said, before we start transforming, I want a plan for everyone on my company, how we can make sure that there's going to be room for everyone. So then they develop those people into coaches, right? Project managers become coaches, become Scrum masters, but make sure that they get the support and training. Self-organization skills, again, sort of comes down how much control and hierarchical the company is. So in short, what I will say for these last 3 points is it's not only about the team. And Toby is an expert at enterprise agility. That piece has to be there. it's kind of like the axle in the vehicle, right? In an automobile, you have to have that piece intact. If that's broken, then whether it's agile or project management or anything else, you will see the cracks. So having said that, I am going to see our next slide. Minaxi and Toby for assessing the progress. So Toby, tell me, what is your primary way of measuring this transformation, where it is in its path, and what else one needs to do for it?
Yeah, for me, and I selfishly put happiness first in the slide because I think it's extremely important. And a lot of times we don't think about that as an important metric. We focus on everything else, but we don't focus enough on happiness. And I personally believe that happy teams produce happy software, which makes customers happy, right? So happy teams produce the best software in an efficient way because they're engaged, they're passionate. But having said all that, how do you measure happiness? There is no one tool to do that. I mean, actually, you often talk about the Jemba walk, right? Where you're walking the halls, you're talking to people, you're connecting with people, your emotional intelligence of your leaders, the servant leadership of the leads who are working, the senior managers, all that plays a role in how the team is feeling. If there is psychological safety, if the team is pumped and really passionate about solving the problems and the work that they're doing, it's going to definitely reflect on that. So while there is no tool to kind of measure that, anybody who's making this transition or making any kind of transformation needs to understand that all transitions are just, it's the only way it can be, it is chaotic. We work and live in a VUCA world where there's a lot of volatility, there is a lot of ambiguity, there's a lot of changes happening too fast. And because of all that, a lot of times there can be turbulence that can bring down the motivation of the team. So focusing on the happiness and making them happy and measuring that can be through conversations, that can be through surveys. You for your organization, you can find ways in which you can measure that happiness, and that's going to be important for you. Now, Minaxi, since you asked me the question, I'm going to ask you, what is important from your perspective?
Agile focuses a lot on delivering value, right? So for me, it's always like go to the basics, go back and see why we are doing this. Eventually, yes, happiness, big one, because unhappy people can't put their best in producing anything.
Yep.
And here we're talking of producing value. I have to feel valuable, and I'm usually feeling valuable when I'm happy. So thank you for that. And from there, I'll segue into the delivery part, which is delivering value. If my customer wants a dwelling, right, a place to live, what do they want? Do they want a hut by the beach, or do they want a fort in, in Europe? What is it that they want? So understanding what is valuable to my customer. And again, the word want versus valuable sometimes has a nuance there. Sometimes we are in a place to make that recommendation and say, oh, you're asking for a castle, but, given that you are by the beach, it might make sense to have something more accessible to, the beach, for example. So, yeah, so that's one thing about making sure that we are in that position and we have that relationship to deliver value. Now, how would you measure delivering value? For some teams, which are, let's say it's a non-functional requirement, let's say it's an AWS migration, right? Are we really saving them money? Are we really improving on performance? Are we really using the right VPCs and elasticity to release those resources when we don't need them? So, I mean, value could be different things depending on what it is, functional, non-functional, and then you would measure it accordingly,
yep.
Right?
And what I want to add here, Minaxi, is that,
Please.
Sure, happiness is important, value delivery is important, but measuring the process changes that you've made or the frameworks or approaches that you're using, the end of the day is that not just delivering value, but doing it in an effective and efficient way is extremely important, right? Everybody wants quicker time to the market. Everybody wants it to be done yesterday, right? But we have limited resources, we have challenges with people and competing priorities. So making the right choices and executing your Scrumban operations in a way from an efficiency perspective. Now, all that is great, sounds great, but how do you measure that? So there is no silver bullet. There is no different tool for Scrumban. It's the same, almost the same kind of tool set that you use for capturing or understanding your progress, understanding where you are today, where you are having challenges, and where do you want to go. You would still use some of the same tools that you've been using with Scrum and Kanban, and different ALM systems, for example, Jira. They all have some of those built in. You could also work with your organization metrics team, if you have one, to create very customized reports, for example, Tableau, wherein you can export from your ALM system, and then that can be computed. So a few things that have worked for in Scrum and Kanban. So Kanban typically uses more cumulative flow diagrams, wherein it's like a heat map where you're saying what needs to be done or to be done, what is in progress, and what is completed. So the heat map shows you that. And from that, you can extract important information as, what is your lead time? What is your cycle time? You can look at, where the bottlenecks are. How long does it take when you're stuck in the bottleneck to kind of come out of it so that you are delivering? So the same metrics can be used here as well for your efficiency and your effectiveness. In addition to that, because this is Scrumban, you can look at your sprint burndown. If you are adding Kanban on top of your Scrum, you can definitely still utilize your sprint burndown. But if you are more, if your version of Scrumban has more Kanban and less Scrum, then you focus more on your CFD, which is your flow diagram, and your lead time, cycle time.
I'll just chime in, Toby. And then, because you have those metrics, right, then that is what allows you to become nimble.
Yep, you
right?
got it.
You got that insight, and now like, okay, this is my bottleneck. This is the area where I need to be nimble.
Yep, exactly.
This is my waste. This is where I need to automate. And that brings us to effectiveness.
Absolutely. All right. So I hope that you got quite a lot out of our presentation today, but your learning doesn't have to stop right here. If you are serious about wanting to try Scrumban with your teams, here are some books that we looked at and we got some information from, just to share with you as well. If you're serious of using this Scrumban approach, you can look up these books. I think all of them are available on Amazon, and we don't make any money by recommending these books. We just wanted to share with you. In addition to that, here are some links that we will be sharing the slides, so you can take a look at these as well. With that, we invite you to really think about, why do you want to make the change? What changes do you want to make? And think about change as a continuum, right? Change is the only constant, and Agile can be your friend, right? Make small changes iteratively, learn from it. If you fail fast, make changes, move forward. And definitely, if this works for you, if Scrumban works for you, if you think there are benefits that your team can get from it, go ahead and experiment and see how that works. The whole idea is to be Agile and not to do Agile. And if you do that, Scrumban will happily live ever after. With that, we thank you. I know we are on time, but if there are any questions, we don't mind waiting for a couple of more minutes to answer any questions. And please do connect with us on LinkedIn. We're happy to support you when you do decide to go on the Scrumban journey. Thank you.
Oops, I was on mute, sorry. Toby, I was wondering, is it okay? Do we have time for some questions?
Yeah, we can take some questions.
Okay, I'll take them in order. There was one about scalability. Do you want to answer that?
Sure. So what is the specific question?
Let's see. If I've lost kind of the exact question, but it said, how do you scale this? I'm just paraphrasing it.
Okay. So sure. So one of the things that we talked about is Scrumban typically is done at a team level. If your organization, if your project, you really feel that there is a need for a very scale, which, what is the meaning of scale in this particular case, right? Which means that multiple teams are following similar practices and are learning from each other and moving forward. That's one way of looking at scale. The other way of looking at scale is everybody is working from a central, one huge backlog, and then multiple teams are working concurrently to produce that. So that's typically another way of looking at scale. The way scaling can work with Scrumban is what Minaxi talked about earlier, right? Where you start small, you start with one project, see how that works, run it for some time so that it becomes mature. And then what you have learned from this one project, you can replicate that across the organization. Scrumban is going to be only effective if it's in smaller teams. You cannot have, a Scrumban team of 60 people or 80 people. It just doesn't work as well in that case. So yes, you can replicate the process, but they have to be, micro teams, smaller teams, so that they're nimble. Because the bigger team, there's more challenges with communication, and you want these teams to be cohesive, small, making decisions on a daily basis and moving forward. I hope that answers your question.
In terms of that small teams, I just want to add this. I forget the name of one of the gurus of Agile and Lean and Kanban. He said, if 2 large pizzas cannot feed the team, then the team is too big.
Yeah.
So let's go by that rule of thumb.
Yeah.
There's another question, Toby, and I can take it or you can take it. Andre says, in context of culture and self-organizing, real experience, as per him, leaders are open and supporting, but teams don't have mindset of ownership and accountability. What am I missing with this organization?
You want to take it?
I'll start, and please, add in your expertise and your experiences. Andre, this is a much larger question. I don't want to give a cookie cutter, but I'll do my best as to what my first thoughts would be into this. So for example, it sounds from the way the statements are written that there is lack of motivation. What is it? Often I try and interpret my situations with teams and human beings like this. What behaviors have been rewarded and what behaviors have been punished? If there was no psychological safety and people are like, what's the point? What's the point that I, show all my motivation, blah, blah, blah. I've learned, I've been burnt. A lot of times that past history is a very important piece in understanding an organization. So versus me putting blame, if it's leadership or is it the team members, I would kind of go with trying to understand some of the past first.
Yeah. So the only thing I want to add there is assumptions.
Please.
So, culture is made out of beliefs and assumptions. So Minaxi talked about the beliefs. The next is assumptions, right? So if there are assumptions in the minds of people, and they're pretty well deep rooted, they will definitely have a bias when it comes to action. For example, if team members or a lot of people in the organization saying that this is an unstable environment where they keep coming with new experiments, but they don't make adequate changes, they don't give it time to survive, and the process dies in the wine, there's no point. Like today, the flavor of the week is Scrumban. Tomorrow is going to be something else. Forget about it. I will just do what you tell me to do. Versus if the assumption is that, hey, they are giving us a new way to try this, let's put our 100% and see if we can make it successful. So if the assumption is that, hey, no matter what we do, we're not going to be rewarded, or we won't be supported, or if things go wrong, our leadership is not going to accept that. If those are the assumptions, then the behaviors will follow in a bad way. So keep that in mind as well. That's the only thing I wanted to add.
Someone asked for the links to LinkedIn, so I'm just sharing those.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much, everybody. This was really helpful, learning from you and sharing some of this with you. I do have a 12 o'clock presentation coming up on neuro-linguistic programming, NLP. So hope to see some of you there as well. Thank you so much, and appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the Access Agile Festival.